Hey, welcome to Friendly Disruption, Episode 2. This week we've got with us, we're very fortunate to have with us Kevin Honeycutt. For those of you who don't know Kevin is a digital literacy consultant who does keynotes all across the world. In his former life, he was an art teacher, he was an educator, he's a school board member, and has done lots of really wonderful things with students and teachers all across the country. One of the things you're going to hear in the background is you're going to hear Kevin's youngest son, Gibson, occasionally chiming in, which is awesome. And as always with us this week, we have Maggie Pickett from the Iowa DOT. I'm Craig Barnum from College Community Schools. And I'm going to give Kevin a chance to give himself a brief introduction. We'll turn over to Maggie. And then this week, we're going to talk a little bit about Snap, Read, and Write, and just have a conversation about the tools and about how Kevin sees those, some of the other digital tools across the country. So with that, we'll kick it over to Kevin and Maggie.
Well, Craig, I think you introduced me well enough. I will say that on Twitter, I'm at Kevin Honeycutt, KevinHoneycutt, and I look forward to any conversations we can have along these lines. I can't wait to get into it with everyone tonight. So let's have a conversation.
All right, awesome.
All right. So yeah, we were going to talk about the tools Snap and Read, Snap and Read Universal. This particular tool is developed by the company called Don Johnston Incorporated. Don Johnston is a wonderful company. They developed and put out multiple call them accessible or assistive technologies and tools and supports for struggling readers and writers. So Snap and Read in particular is what its name kind of says. You snap something on your screen and it reads it to you. So really, it's a text-to-speech tool, right? There's nothing really remarkable about these text-to-speech tools. You know, we have them built in our computers. But something that is remarkable about Snap and Read that I find really helpful for particular students who are struggling readers, there are two tools. One would be the dynamic text leveling. So text leveling is when you have, content in front of you on a page, and you can go in and change the vocabulary. You can change the content so that if you're only understanding like a third grade level, but you're reading things around the eighth grade level, it'll change it to your vocabulary, right? And so, yeah, it's pretty cool. And so the word dynamic then is that it does it live. So if you're reading in a website or some sort of resource, you can turn on this button. It'll go through some algorithm and it'll change the words.
Hey, Maggie, you're breaking up a little bit now, so I'm going to break in with a question real quick. So,
yeah.
And I'm not sure if I remember this, and I'm going to try to give this one to and have Kevin chime in on it too. But I seem to remember seeing an article recently, and I can't remember if it was through one of our interactions in the material study group, or if it was somewhere else on my own, that there's really no cognitive load difference in terms of when a child has a text read to them, like from a reader, or if they're reading it themselves. I know that's true in both in terms of comprehension, but I was also looking at it from a cognitive load standpoint. Was that in one of our meetings, or am I remembering that somewhere else? I know Kevin, with your background in brain research, might have an idea on that as well.
Well, I've heard similar research findings as what you just talked about, Craig, about cognitive load. But I will say that for some kids who have certain sort of struggles or dysfunction, that they may struggle so much in decoding language that they are fatigued at the end of that process and therefore don't get to really take part in sort of understanding what the words meant. I mean, they can say the words and they recognize the words, but as far as drawing meaning from all of the words, they're exhausted. Just decoding is about all they can do. So if you could help them with that, if you can get them all the way to the other side of decoding to understanding, and that's where people will start to say, well, that's cheating, and that's where you can sort of have a conversation on and whether or not that is, what does that really mean?
Yeah, and I think, that's kind of one of the big ahas for me, and Maggie and I have had this conversation multiple times, but, it's this notion that, typically we would think about, in our school at least, I can say, you'd only give that tool primarily give that tool to kids with an IEP or a reading goal or something, language goal. In this case, I think, that changes my thinking a lot about, how maybe we roll this out to all kids. And language, I tend to use a lot as essential for some and good for all, that sort of line of thought. So, Meg, I didn't want to cut you off, but I want to give you a chance to buffer your connection to buffer. So, time back in anytime.
Well, and I think what's unique about some tools like this too is it allows any kid really to engage with text at a level that they're controlling. And as an author of a text, I don't want some algorithm coming along and changing the content on a page. But really, I think this tool does a good job of doing that. And it really, what it also allows for is engagement with the text. So it's not, I'm just going to read it to you and you're going to be a passive listener. You can actually click on the words, the vocabulary that's been changed in the passage, and get the vocabulary, the original vocabulary, changed out. You're able to really engage with the content, with the text in a whole different, potentially more meaningful way than if you were to just be engaging with text without some of those supports. And I see that for kids struggling readers, of course, but also just our typical readers. Wouldn't that be nice if we could allow them?
Oh, he's okay. He's okay. I got it.
They're engaged in that. I don't know.
Okay, so can I jump in here for a minute?
Yeah.
I know that my son and I would go to my wife's classroom and spend many hours lexiling her books K4 to make sure we had the right reading levels identified so the kids could pick up the books. Basically, we're talking about automating the lexiling process while making it possible for the book to offer itself up as a more complex book as the reader identifies that they are appropriately ready for that. I mean, to me, that's freaking magical. Because it's an automatic smart lexiler. So yeah, people might not think lexiling is sexy, but I've been taught by my wife that it is sexy. No, it doesn't limit your kids' choices. Yeah, it makes sense.
No, that's an incredibly powerful point. I mean, and it fits right into this notion that, at least at Prairie, and I can't speak to other places, but there's a big push to try to, particularly with our digital tools, to try to personalize learning as much as we can. And that process of personalization, this is an incredibly powerful example of that you're going to take the same text and diversify it across a set of different kids with different abilities, and it's going to level to meet their needs. That's pretty amazing to me that we now have the tools ready to do that. And it might not occur to people as they design that they can do that. By the way, Maggie sent me earlier today some wonderful resources on this tool, and I'll be sharing them on our Twitter account. Again, I hate the Twitter handle, but it's the best I could do. It's @FDisruption. You can follow us there. I encourage everybody who's listening to do that. We'll put it out there, and I'll also share it with anybody who just drops me an email directly. And that way you can get access to it and start using it right away. So, Kevin, in terms of, sort of other digital tools or other sort of personalization tools you're seeing out there, do you have anything else that snaps to mind, or do you have any further thoughts on this one?
I think as we look at these tools, we have to sort of start with a fresh mindset. If we were starting all over again with education and we're building it from scratch right now, with no preconceived notions and no false allegiances and no long-term marriages to certain constructs, because humans do that. We laminate stuff and we love it so much, and it's worked for us before, and it makes it really hard to see the future. And I think as we're looking at tools that can, yes, help kids with some struggles that they have, at the same time, possibly we're not identifying struggles or deficits. We're finally allowing kids to be what they are. See what I mean? When we had a tool that could address certain kinds of skills, then all those kids looked like they had the right skills because those tools said they did. But what if we'd have had these tools from the beginning? Perhaps kids wouldn't have been identified. And I hate for a kid to be, for their identity of themselves to be an assessment they get each year that identifies their deficits. And I think that happened accidentally. No one meant for that to happen. But think what that does to self-esteem when you come to school knowing you're a slow reader or knowing that you're, you know what I mean? If that could disappear, and suddenly someone reads to you, right? And this has been my struggle my whole life, because I think people have different kinds of intelligence. And I know that sounds like squishy science, but let me give you, for instance, as I'm looking at Maggie here, right? I could draw Maggie right now in front of me. I could draw you and it would look like you, right? I would draw it and it would look like you. And I'm not sure if you could draw me and make me look like me, but I can make you look like you. But I'll misspell your name. Now I'll have a drawing that looks so much like you that you would pay money to have it, and yet I still get an F because I misspelled your name. So there's a total disqualification of the talent I do have, right, in the old school. So I'm hoping that with all of these different changes that we can take a fresh look at what intelligence might mean, what ability might be, right, and allow these tools to fill in perceived deficits. I hope our system changes so it asks our kids to represent their intelligence in many more interesting ways than what we've done in the past. I hope that's where we're headed. But for the short term, we have some pretty neat tools that have the ability to help us in a time when we're shorthanded, under-resourced, under-budgeted, and overstressed. So why in the heck, in a time, it's like we're a MASH hospital, and we have access to all these medicines, why wouldn't we use them?
No, I think that's an incredibly powerful point. And, as I think about it, one of the things we're trying to do in Iowa, and a lot of the language that gets kind of bandied about, is the notion of competency-based education, which I think is what you just described. You kind of described really perfectly in my mind there. This idea, it's not about how you get there. It's, are you competent at the core task that you're being asked to do? And again, it doesn't matter how we get there. It matters that you're able to be competent. And, we have to be able to personalize that. I'll relate another quick anecdote, and I think maybe I did this last week, but I can't remember. It really sucks getting old, and sometimes we myself. But and I know I've told Maggie this story, but at one of our buildings, we're doing an assistive tech study for the Department of Education, and we've gotten access to a couple of great tools for that building exclusively. And actually, one of them we talked about last week was Google Read and Write, which we've deployed across our entire district. But the other tool is called UPAR, which, and Maggie, you know a lot more about UPAR than I do, but from my brief experience, it basically allows kids to sort of identify their areas of strength in terms of how they want to receive instruction and assessment.
Right. And, sorry, I don't mean to cut you.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think it speaks exactly, potentially to what Kevin was saying, is that kids tend to kind of know what they need. We like to have data to make those decisions. But when you put what a kid feels they need with the data to go along with it, you really start to have this picture of what a kid could utilize to feel and feel more successful and be more engaged in their learning. And that's what UPAR does. Some kids are really good using their ears only and listening to a human or human recorded audio speak to them. Some kids are really good at using their eyes and having a digital voice read to them. But other kids, they just want to work on decoding by themselves, even though it may not be a great skill for them. And so having this information really helps make some of those informed decisions, and that's what UPAR does. But there's that line though between taking in information from these tools and also taking in information from the student's perspective about what it is that they respond to and engage with.
Well, and the point, the where I was going with this to begin with, I think that's a wonderful, in-depth description of what I was trying to get at. But there was an anecdote that came across that I heard from Prairie Creek, which was there were a couple of young men. It's a 5th, 6th grade building, so they think they were 6th graders. And these kids were a couple grade levels below, at least in reading. So I think they're reading on a 3rd or 4th grade reading level. And by the way, to self-disclose, I was a late reader too. I didn't really become tech savvy. Didn't really start reading until I was in junior high. So I can totally relate to this feeling that I think a little bit like Kevin was saying earlier. These two young men realized that they couldn't read, but they knew they were bright. But they had convinced themselves that they weren't ever going to be successful at school. But they took the UPAR and they discovered that they were much better at auditory learning, so like with their ears, just as you described. And so the staff at Creek started personalizing the instruction for them with other tools, principally with things like Google Read and Write, tools that are readily available, text readers, things like that. And what they discovered is that those kids started comprehending text 2 grade levels above what they were at. So it went from an area of deficit to an area of strength. And that's a fascinating story because those kids at first didn't believe it, right? I mean, they've been told their whole life, you're not capable. And they're hearing, you're dumb, is what they're hearing. Mm-hmm. Where the teachers aren't saying this. Kevin says, no one's saying that, but that's the implied message. And so suddenly they're in this world where, wait a minute, I've got all these opportunities. And I think that's what these tools do. And I just think, what would happen if we gave these to everybody? What if we did that for all? It just gets me excited. It gets me amped up.
When I'm talking to groups of teachers, what I'm trying to do is instill in them this reminder that when you first got into teaching, you would do anything. You would do anything to help your kids. And then you learn some pedagogy, and college taught you some practicum, and you learned some things, and you did those, and you did them, and you did them, and you did them, and you did them, right? And it's possible to sort of get stuck in a little snow globe where the only thing in the snow globe with you is those first things you learned, right? And so I want to remind them that there are kids who are waiting. It's like they're inside learning cells, like in a prison, right? And we have the ability to pick the lock now, but it's going to be work. I mean, we have to open ourselves up to allowing ourselves to see that tool. And I'll think of it like translation, like language. I don't think we should confuse language translation with understanding, right? Does it matter how you translate? Are we grading the tool? Or are we grading the understanding, right? If we only had one way to translate, then we graded the translation. Well, we have new ways to translate now, right? But it's going to take some advocates. It's going to take some people jumping in there. The story you just told, Craig, is $1 million story. More people need to hear it. That there are a lot of people who've been through the system who just weren't good at the narrow range of things the system seemed to think were important to evaluate. When we jump to the other side and look at understanding, I think that's what we need to be evaluating, right? But it happens over and over again. We live long enough to value our techniques over our results.
So who changes the conversation?
Go ahead, Meg. I didn't catch that. It was a little garbled. Sorry.
Yeah, who changes the conversation? In a school, in a district, in a building, in a state, at a state department, who changes the conversation? Because a lot of times I'll tell you, especially, I come from the world of special ed. At times it feels like you're kind of knocking your head against the wall, saying the same thing. And here I sit with 2 very intelligent men, coming from maybe a different area of expertise in the area of education, not special education, kind of saying the same thing. Who changes the conversation?
You want to go first, Craig?
Well, my take is, it starts with this. It starts with us. We got to point the finger back at us. And that's one of the reasons why, clearly we're doing something, we want to do something like this. But I also think it takes good leadership. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, in districts that I've been associated with, leaders have to understand this. They have to buy into it. And then you can start changing, I hate to use the word, but you can start changing the narrative with parents, because there's a lot that goes into this. And there's a lot to unpack, because ultimately I think people have to understand that really, and I'm just going to lay bare where I come from on this, and people might disagree with it, but that, really our public education system isn't really in the business of sifting and sorting kids like it was 40 years ago. We're not trying to separate the wheat from the chaff and say, okay, you guys go to college, you guys go into the workforce directly. Our job is to get everybody across the bar, across the river. And that takes a different mindset of design, different leadership design, and frankly, different communication models with our parents and our communities. And this is all how it happens. But I think it's a big thing. I think the more people who we can start having conversations like this across a broad spectrum, the better off we're going to be. Now, I'd really be fascinated to hear what Kevin has to say from a kind of a macro perspective, because, Kevin, you've been to not only all over the country, but all over the world on this one.
Yeah. I think we're distracted by local political focus sometimes, and the pendulum swings back and forth, and at some point practitioners have to divorce themselves of that political affiliation and just start focusing on what's right. What I've discovered wherever I go is doing the right thing for kids is not political. Both sides can claim it. It's human, right? So if that's what our focus is, doing the right thing, I think everything can change. But I think it changes one story at a time. That practitioner that's in special ed, you've got to tell stories. Well, sometimes we don't because we think we can't because there are policies, blah, blah, blah. You know, I'm in the business of telling stories. Stories change hearts and minds. Stories move entire rooms, right? I believe that emotion cements learning. Without emotion, it's want, 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 want on a teacher level, on a student level. So that story. Now, I can change the story and change the names of the people in this story. That doesn't mean you don't hold on to the story. The one you just talked about, Greg, with those two kids who thought they were stupid, who turned out that they could function above grade level if the system met their needs at the front door, instead of convincing them they couldn't at the front door. So that's a great story. And I've got stories. Maggie's got stories. Practitioners are going to have to start sharing your stories, valuing your stories, because that's what changes things. And to those parents, and Craig, you're right. The biggest problem with public education is everyone went to school, therefore everyone thinks they're an expert. But what they don't know is that many things have changed, and the way we teach has changed, and what the world expects from our teaching has changed. And so we've got to bring them along, just like you were saying, Craig. Moms and dads, we're doing some new things this year because we know your kids are going to need these skills. So we're learning new things beside your children. If we like them, we'll tell them what to know, but we love them, so we're going to teach them how to know. So please forgive us if things are a little weird. Come talk to us. Let's do this together. That sounds squishy. It sounds like a movement, and I really do believe it's going to take at least that.
Well, it's, you know, there's about a million thoughts that occur, you know, as you say that. My old mentor, Al Rowe, quoted research that sounds remarkably like what you said, and I wish I could. It's been like 20 years since he taught me this, but it's always stuck with me, Kevin. And maybe I've told you this before. I can't recall again, but according to his research, there was a mantra we used to have while he was here, which was emotion drives attention, drives memory, drives learning. And that was a design sort of spectrum we used all the time. So emotion is really important. I can't reiterate enough that, you know, telling stories and being upfront with people and is really probably the most powerful change leveraging agent we have, I think.
So let me park some things beside that since you said it, because I can't resist now that you've broadened that just a bit, okay? Good teachers write on kids with permanent marker. So do bad teachers. Teaching is non-invasive brain surgery because the brain allows itself to be physiologically changed by the scalpel of experience. So what I tell teachers is that we need an educational Hippocratic oath to do no harm, to never make kids feel worse than they do when they get to school. How you feel at the time of learning will forever be associated with the learning. That's called associative learning. It has everything to do with what you just said, Craig. When I say emotion cements learning, I mean that. If you think back in your life to big events, your marriage, the death of a family member, almost all of us can look back and we can remember with perfect fidelity everything that happened around that same time. It's like the brain takes this permanent snapshot of anything that happens when emotions are at play, good or bad. So to be learning in school with no emotion is to be learning with the tape recorder turned off, right?
Oh, yeah.
So those teachers who love what they teach, it's in the air. There is this sort of amazing mystique, this love of learning that's in the air that comes through their love, right? So they, short of technology even, there are these amazing teachers who just are what they teach. And I love those folks. I love them. Add to that the power of technology to let kids really express themselves and really get to the learning despite perceived deficits. Suddenly almost anything is possible. And to me, that's the most exciting part of it, right? That we all get excited about this again. That we all think about how important emotions are again, how kids feel is important. And there are going to be people who don't like this. They're going to say, well, that's just stupid. That's just, you know what? Those are the people who are into the rigor thing. You know, rigor, we need more rigor. We need rigor precedes mortis, you know, and
you won the room with that one, man.
But I think you're you know, and again I go back to struggling learners in some capacity. and the marker that's being written on them isn't always coming from a place that they're enjoying, and learning is perceived as kind of difficult, hard task. And so I think you're exactly right. We can take the conversation when we can take it, both of us, take that to the level, but also take it to the ground floor and really think about one story at a time, and really getting people's emotion to shift around this change. I think that allows people to see a new image, a new vision for what learning can and should potentially be for kids.
So if we were to sketch out a continuum of learning like this, okay, what we're currently doing, 20% of the kids in the class can do it very easily and feel very confident and really, really just move through that beautifully, right? Because it really fits them. And 20% on the end of the spectrum, way down here, they can't do it at all. And this 20% can almost do it. It all just lays itself out this way, okay? So, and to think of it like this, if I was teaching you to play the guitar, Maggie, and it hurts, it literally hurts, right? So you don't want to play music as much anymore because it hurts. You don't want to play more than the pain is convincing you not to. It's a fight, and playing guitar lost, right? In a system that causes pain, right? I have to make you want to rock, and you have to want to rock more than you care about this pain. And that's doable, but it's hard, and it's rare that you find that Mr. Holland that can get you to find your way to the opus, right? But what if I could change how it felt to play the guitar? What if it didn't hurt? What if I bought light gauge strings and flat wound strings and set the action low and stood beside you and cheered you on? I could do a lot just with those tools. Now, what if you didn't have to touch the strings? What if you could still make music? Right? So if we can go that far, if we can go all the way to there, and if people say, well, that's not fair, that's just cheating. If your daughter was a quadriplegic and she wanted to play piano, what tools would you bring to bear? And what things would you now find fair? So stop being a purist, okay? Open your mind up and let's make room for every learner. Commit to that, and we can do everything else. Okay, I'm done. Sorry.
Well, no, that's an awesome point. And Kevin, I don't want to step over what Maggie's going to say, but I've seen you do that demo and make the guitar analogy a couple of times, and I think it's so perfect, and yet it never connected with me in this context, and I think it's totally true. And I would even, I take it back to the idea before that, again, we're not in the business of sifting and sorting. Just because your child is doing well and the other children in the room are doing well doesn't somehow take something away from your child. I mean, there's a zero-sum notion out there about education right now, and I think those are the things we have to change in our public's perception of this, that just because this child is excelling doesn't mean that that's hurting your child. There's plenty of love is abundant, okay? Success is abundant in this regard. These are not finite resources. We don't have to fight over them. These are all things that are going to happen. And, and thinking about it from kind of an exiting standpoint, and my oldest child's going off to college next year, okay? And so everybody talks, well, what about scholarships? What about this? What about that? In terms of money, and this gets real then. The thing is that the kids who are really high functioning, they're going to sift to the top. They're going to find the money. They're going to find ways to excel and exceed. It really doesn't matter that much. Let's just get everybody over the top and get this done. That's a great analogy. Maggie, I'm really interested to hear what you have to say, because you haven't heard it. I've heard Kevin a couple times, so I knew that one was coming at some point.
No, I really appreciate that. And I think so many times in this conversation, my head flies back to universal design for learning. What we're talking about here is and Dr. Batch from the University of South Florida, he's like a guru in RTI or MTSS. He said something interesting this past October when I heard him speak. He said a high tide floats all boats. And within a multi-tiered system of supports, a high tide is universal design for learning, where every student comes to the table and you have a task to do, and everybody's allowed to do it in a way that they are able to do and are able to engage with. And I think that that's absolutely right. You gave 3 really awesome examples of of strategies or different tools that you could utilize to learn how to play guitar. And you're right, I have very, very sensitive fingers. When I've tried to play guitar, I always just give up because it hurts too much. But
Right.
had I had different tools or different approaches to kind of learning some of the chords and things, I maybe would have been more engaged. But I really appreciate that analogy.
Well, if you think about what we did in the past, okay, so Maggie, your fingers hurt. So we slow you way down. We take you to another classroom, and we only have you use one finger at a time. And we still can't play chords, but you can play partial chords. So we can't take you back to class because they're playing full chords in there. So, but in my room, you can play partial chords. And so we're going to slow it down even more. So you're kind of stuck. You're kind of stuck over here on the side. So if I could somehow let you play full chords, but remove the barriers and remove the pain and remove the perception that you're somehow cheating, so you don't hate yourself and think you're not real, right? If I could bend the rules in that way and then bring you back. And there's a quote that I love from a movie called A River Runs Through It. He says, "My father was of the opinion that any man that didn't know how to properly catch a trout should ever be allowed to disgrace a trout by catching it." There are people, I think, in education who feel that way, who, if you don't pay your dues, little missy, if you don't, it should hurt, right? It hurt when I did it, sucked when I did it too. Just suck it up, little mister. They almost don't deserve it unless they've suffered. But what they don't get is those people suffer more because it's not as easy for them because of some differences that they might have, right? So why are we judging at that place, right? Why don't we? If you think about all those kids getting out, graduating, going into the workforce, they're going to have to function. They're going to have to function in a job. They're going to have to function in life. Why don't we make a place for them to function in school? Since they have to anyway, this shouldn't be hard. This shouldn't be a hard barrier.
And what great experience than to learn how you function best and be able to determine what tools and supports that you personally need to function best.
Shouldn't that be the work of school?
Oh, shouldn't it? Yeah.
Shouldn't it? The biggest discovery is you. How do you work best? In what ways can you succeed? This is why I like project-based learning. This is why I like some teachers who are doing a lot of these sorts of things where 5 kids are working in modules that are like family-sized modules, and the kids who are a little bit different, but who are more creative. And I find that a lot of kids who struggle with some of the mainstream skills that schools want you to attain are often amazingly creative in some other way. I taught art for a whole career, and this was true over and over and over. That kid would come in with D's and F's and be one of my best art students. And I have a theory on this. I think when you're precluded from the norm, from the status quo, you get better living on the periphery. You get better at the sort of non-traditional approach because that's where you have to live. You didn't even get to choose that. You've been pushed there. So to a person, a lot of those kids who are precluded from being considered the norm at the highest level of functioning, at the whatever you want to call it, you might call them outcasts. I usually called them my A students in art, my theater, my best thespians, my future Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Diane Fossey's, the weirdos, you know what I mean? But we didn't have room for them in school. And we do this a lot. I think we have like 9 slots. And if you don't fit those, you're an outcast. We'll find something to do. In the old days, we'd say, get her some welding skills. She's not going to college. Now, if you can build an aircraft, you're going to make $70,000 a year to start, while the other kid with her master's degree is still serving tables at Applebee's. So I don't know. I think everything's in play right now. Sorry, I'm all over the road. Woo-hoo.
No, but that's absolutely true. I mean, I couldn't agree more with and I think again that's to me that's a lot about what a competency-based system would look like at the end of the day. Are you baseline competent in these things? It doesn't matter how you get there. It doesn't matter what method you use to get there. And you should really, the journey should be up to you. That's where the personalization comes in. You should learn how to do that based upon your strength set, because ultimately, when you get out into the workforce, even in the field of education, I have yet to find a person who's asked me what I got on my ACTs that had any impact on what I was doing in my job, other than just sort of, in passing. But you see what I'm saying? I mean, it doesn't matter. That stuff doesn't matter. I mean, and by the way, I did really terribly on my ACTs. I wasn't a good test taker. I really struggle with a lot of those things. So, but I learned how to to compensate for it and play to my own strengths. And that's what we ought to teach all of our kids to do. You shouldn't have to, we shouldn't have to figure that out on our own. We should be overt about that.
I want to throw something in real quick while we're sitting at this juncture, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
I work with a young man named Estin Talavera, and on Twitter, write this down. It's at Estin, ESTIN TALAVERA, Estin Talavera, and he has a podcast called The Way I See It. The Way I See It. Estin is totally blind and has been since early childhood, and he's also one of the best tech users I've ever met. If you want to feel foolish, go up against Estin side by side with any tech you want and watch him smoke you. So he's the kind of person that should be helping any assistive technology program because he lives it. He is it. He's also a keynote speaker. I think he's 24. He's an amazing kid, and he should be on here talking to you guys. He's got attitude, and he's worth all of it. I mean, he came into one of my workshops, and I couldn't keep up with him. I mean, I was trying. I had made all these sort of adjustments thinking, well, I'll help him. He did not need my help. He needed me to get out of his way is what he needed. And it humbled me, and it made me realize these kids can go as fast as they want to if we can just get out of their way. A lot of times the things we invent that are supposed to be helping them are the things that are hindering them in the first place, because we are looking at the tool as a person who didn't need it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, I get it. I totally.
We're building barriers out of the assistive technology when it turns out that Estin might not need 90% of what you thought he needed. What he needs is something you never even heard of. He needs you to listen to him. And I think that's the guy that needs to be in front of the audience to tell them this isn't about trying harder. It's about relaxing and letting go a bit.
No, that's a great point. And this whole idea of relinquishing control as a teacher, I think that's a whole different thing. And we could take another hour and talk about that in and of itself. I mean, that's a really interesting conversation. We don't need to go there now, but I think it's at the core of some of this stuff is the notion that, we have to get over the idea, and I'm going to lay another idea out there on it that I think is important, and that content is really the secondary, if maybe tertiary partner in this whole endeavor. It's really the art of teaching that matters, and our content is just neutral. It shouldn't matter at all, But anyway, that's a whole different topic for another day, maybe. But we'll get that young man on here at some point, because it sounds like he'd be excellent for exactly the sort of things we're thinking about here.
Yeah.
I've got his. Thank you.
I think you're gonna love him. And he's in my speakers bureau. I have a speakers bureau, and I have a whole row of young up and coming Jedi speakers. He's one of those folks.
Well, that'd be great. That'd be awesome. That would be absolutely delightful. Thanks, Kevin. Well, I think we're at about 35 minutes here. This has been a wonderful conversation, but I want to respect everybody's time. I know this is a lot of time to commit to listen to three talking heads talk, but hopefully you've enjoyed our time. And again, I want to thank Kevin Honeycutt for hanging out with us tonight, and as always, Maggie for bringing the tool forward. And we'll have a tool up here in another couple of weeks. Put another episode up, and hope to see you then. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me. I can't wait. I hope we get to talk to you guys again.
Yeah. Hey, Kevin, hang out for just a minute as I stop the broadcast.